Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're gonna take a look at the most recent balance patch in Lost Ark. Some changes were massive while some others were just plain funny. We're gonna talk about the classes that we currently have in the West and also those that were announced to come, like the Glavier and also the Destroyer. The rest of them, not gonna get into it because by the time we get them, more changes might have already been applied. In general, just in case you're new, balance patches and class changes are quite frequent in Lost Ark, and thus the meta changes also frequently. At the same time, I would like to encourage you not to be very disappointed if the class you're currently maining gets a nerf, because as I've said, balance patches are quite frequent, so maybe in the next balance patch it's gonna come back to its original position. The devs have a plan to get all of the classes to be very viable at the end of the day, and this year 2022 is the year where they're gonna look into reorganizing the classes, restructuring them, starting from the ground up. But at the same time, cannot blame you if you're gonna change your main based on a balance patch or based on a tier list someone makes, simply because in Lost Ark in general, and especially in the West, there is so much peer pressure forcing you into certain directions that I cannot even describe it. However, I still advise you to stay strong and just play whatever you like. That's the best way to do things in Lost Ark. Let's start with the warriors first. Berserker received quite many changes, including class engravings, a nerf to the Mayhem one, where they reduced the damage dealt by 4% at max level, and the buff to the Berserker technique engraving, where they added 20% more critical damage at level 3. It's hard to believe that people will stop playing Mayhem Berserker just because of this nerf, so I think we're still in the safe area. An interesting change to their party synergy skill, Red Dust. The cooldown has been lowered from 30 to 24 seconds, while increasing your own attack power now by 24% max. The cooldown reduction tripod for it has been removed and replaced by a 6% debuff for the party that lasts 16 seconds, so a very high uptime even without swiftness. This debuff cannot increase based on the skill level anymore as it used to do before, and in general various other damage increased party debuffs were added to existing skills, replacing some old tripod effects, and also Berserker build is now full-on back attack, as some of the skills got changed from front attack to back attack. Tiny buffs to the Gunlancer for the Lone Knight build, and the Destroyer, which is a class with an exciting history and is coming over to our region in May, received some really nice changes. In particular, a lot less RNG when generating blue cores, which are then used as a class mechanic, right, to hit harder with the purple skills. Now, many skills have guaranteed core generation and an increase in cores acquired. On top of this, some of the popular skills received attack speed tripods instead of the old RNG to get more core mechanics, right? Which is fabulous, a fabulous change in general. These changes should make the gameplay less choppy and more, let's say, controllable based on boss patterns, and should provide an increase in their DPS, as you can now plan your rotations as opposed to try to get lucky for them. On top of this, they received a taunt, becoming the third class in Lost Ark that has access to this mechanic, which is interesting again. Other changes on various skills include stagger increase, damage reduction, range, and also the removal of perfect positioning for sizing hammer, a fundamental skill in any destroyer build. Paladin received minor but good changes to a few of their skills, which now have back attack properties. Moving on to the martial artist profession, Wardancer received an amazing 18% increased damage in PvE content and a 14% increased damage for their awakening and esoteric skills. Massive. An interesting change to Wind's Whisper tripod, Oath of the Wind, which used to give crit chance before, now gives mana recovery, which might actually change the builds a little bit. Couple of other skills changed from head to back attack, which is good in the big pictures for a Wardancer. And lastly, their engraving First Intention received a buff of 5% more damage at level 3. Scrapper received also a massive buff, 24% increased damage for PvE content. Several skills received slight changes to the nerfy side, and also some shock skills reorganized to be back attacks as opposed to head attacks. Their awakening, Blast of Runation, was slightly buffed alongside the Taijutsu class engraving, which now does 5% more damage at level 3. Soul Fist received some Soul Fist changes. At this point, I think they don't even really know where to go with this lovely class. A massive 30% increased damage in PvE for all of the skills except Awakening, and a substantial 9% damage increase for all of the skills in PvP content except the Awakening. Speaking of Awakening, both of their Awakenings got a whooping 55% damage increase, which might actually make the first Awakening build viable again. Anyway, let's get into the funny bit, right? Energy release is no longer a damage buff for you and the group, it's a shield for you and the group. Pulverizing Fist's ready attack tripod is no longer an attack power buff, it's a damage reduction while casting buff. Similar story with Lightning Palm, no longer provides an attack power buff, but instead does more damage. And lastly, just to make sure the Soul Fist will become a top tier support class, Flash Steps Victory Shout tripod no longer increases the attack power, but instead becomes sort of a walking panacea, as it has 80% chance of removing one debuff. I personally found these changes quite funny, but at the same time a little bit of interesting in them, even though I didn't really spend much time thinking about them and how will they work. Just saying, a little bit funny that they get a lot of, let's say, sort of defensive kind of things. Lastly, the Soul Fist's Energy Overflow class engraving received a small buff in damage too. Glavier, a class that's expected to release this month for us, received a few changes that include mostly buffs in the critical department, both rate and damage, but also a couple of nerfs to some skills. Strikers received very few changes, with a notable one that Lightning Tiger Strike doesn't dash through bosses anymore, so you cannot really use it as a positioning skill from now on. Moving on to the gunner profession, Deadeye received just a few changes, which include awakening area adjustment and a buff to the Pistolier class engraving, which now does 10% more damage at level 3. Artillerist received some interesting changes alongside a small overall PvE damage increase of 5%. Some skills had their neutralization level lowered, such as Air Raid and Homing Barrage, while some others had it increased, such as Napalm Strike and Multiple Rocket Launcher. This makes it easier to participate in faster stagger checks, right? Because you don't have to wait for detonation or skill animations. Other skill changes include the removal of back attack property from Flamethrower and Napalm Shot, which in turn is amazing, as they will now do more damage if we play with the Hitmaster engraving, which is quite common, by the way, in many builds, especially for later on when we will have access to 5 or 6 engravings, right? The Turret Awakening skill was also buffed to have more HP in PvE content, which I suppose is nice, I guess, but that doesn't really fix its fundamental problem of just being RNG. Lastly, the bombardment mode was changed so that we can dash during it, thus removing the status and being free instantly. This is a good step in the right direction. Additionally, we can use time stop potions now while in bombardment mode, and if we are silenced, we can use the skill to end the mode, thus being at least able to move, right? Lastly, the Focus Fire Barrage skill was changed to activate 16% faster, finish casting 30% faster, and its range was increased by 50%. Interesting change, maybe for later on when we will be able to properly play a specialization build. This will come in handy. Sharpshooters get some buffs too, mostly for their class mechanic, as they will generate the Hawk resource faster in both PvE and PvP. Awakening skill also changed to restore the energy to full. A nerf in the second companion class engraving, which now increases your own attack power by 10% as opposed to the old 30% at level 3. Gunslingers received a few changes, a couple of buffs, but also a PvP nerf for one of their pistol skills. Their class engraving Time to Hunt received a buff of 5% crit chance at level 3. Let's move on to mages. Bards received a counter effect on Prelude of Storm, and all their debuffs received an extra 1 second duration on the target. Sorceress got nerfed. Their identity enhanced magic now gives 8% more damage as opposed to 10%, and their arcane torrent gives 16% as opposed to the old 20%. At the same time, both their identities scale a tiny bit better with specialization now, as the coefficient was increased from 2.15 to 2.2. Lastly, the assassin profession. Blade's class engraving surge was nerfed, and the community was in a panic 2 days ago on Discord, as the devs felt that it's overperforming in endgame content. Shadowhunter got a tiny buff to the identity gauge acquisition speed from specialization, a nice party utility skill on grind chain, howl, and demonic slash, but most importantly, they can now sustain this debuff in demon form too, as both ruining rush and deathclaw have this debuff as a tripod option. Lastly, they also received a nice, smallish but nice buff of 4.5% damage increase in PvE content. And that's all for my overview on this week's major balance patch from the Korean servers. Important to remember that whenever the devs restructure classes or have these balance changes, they are looking at data based on the endgame population in Korea, which have their builds structured around things we don't have yet. So having that said, just because that class is underperforming there in Korea doesn't mean that that class is also going to be underperforming at item level, I don't know, 1302, which is also a reason why they wanted us to catch up to the Korean version as soon as possible, so we can get access to everything, thus making all of this class balance that they're doing and class restructuring actually make sense. So to answer the question, when are we getting these changes, assuming some of you might be excited for some of them, in the past it was relatively fast in between Korea getting a balance patch and other regions getting it. However, seeing that our version is new and also we've had some content cadence hiccups, let's call them like that, I don't think it's going to be in the next few weeks. We'll see what they decide with our release as well, and yeah, something to look forward to at least, right? And even more to come, as they've said they're gonna really twist classes upside down this year. I wish you lots of love. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'm gonna see you in my next video. Until then, take care and stay safe.